Thank you for joining us here at Climate Week 2020 for the event U.S. States Leading on Ocean and Climate Action. My name is Jessie Turner, the Program Manager for the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification, and I will be your host for the afternoon. It's very fitting that this event is being co-hosted by Ocean Conservancy, co-founder of the OA Alliance, alongside the states of Washington, Oregon, California, and the province of British Columbia in Canada. And indeed, it was in direct response to the growing threats of ocean acidification and climate-related changing ocean conditions that the Alliance was created to do two things. The first is to elevate the importance and the role of ocean across international and domestic climate frameworks. And the second is to inspire governments to take tangible state and regional action that further mitigate the causes, measure and respond to the changes we are already seeing, and better prepare for the changes yet to come. So this afternoon, we are going to hear from Governor Jay Inslee in Washington State about the impacts already felt along the Pacific coast here in North America, and how the state has used the science to respond and ensure that climate and ocean policies accurately reflect their independence. We will hear from US congressional leaders about the role of the federal government as we chart a path forward for 2020 and beyond, and really making sure that we squarely place climate and ocean action within a broad suite of recovery priorities. And finally, we'll have a discussion with 4 states, including California, Maryland, Maine, and Hawaii, who have been tirelessly advancing these efforts to address climate change and its impacts, including those to ocean and coastal communities, resources, and traditions and cultures. So with that, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I know we've got a great audience of viewers out there, partners and friends of the OA Alliance and other networks that we're part of, so thank you for joining. And with that, it is my great honor to send it over to Governor Jay Inslee in Washington, who is a co-founder of the OA Alliance and has prepared some remarks for us this afternoon. So with that, Governor Inslee, over to you.
Hi everyone, Governor Jay Inslee here. You know, along the West Coast, the wildfires, which really are climate fires that have been fueled by climate change, and our smoke-filled skies have rightly captured our collective attention and response. The devastation to our communities and to our resources has been massive, and the smoke has traveled across the globe. We know this is just the tip of the iceberg for climate impacts. Lurking beneath the surface, climate change and carbon emissions are changing the ocean and the life within it, this we know. Warming temperatures, marine heat waves, declining oxygen, and ocean acidification are now here big time. Jobs, food security, and ocean health are under threat. And there's scientific consensus that the impacts to our ocean will get much worse without urgent attention to reducing our emissions and to building resiliency. Our shellfish aquaculture industry felt the first impacts over a decade ago, when the ocean acidification caused the death of juvenile oysters in their hatcheries. And with investment in science, we now know that Dungeness crab, salmon, and a wide range of other important species are also at risk. Local models predict that climate change will make the Puget Sound much less hospitable to our native fish, shellfish, and marine mammals. Climate change is putting our region's economy and identity at risk. In Washington, we responded to the science and the climate impacts to our ocean resources. We set a course for action. We worked with our fellow West Coast governments to understand changing ocean conditions. And together we co-founded an international network of governments to support collective action, the Ocean Acidification Alliance. Today, we have over 100 members who released 15 ocean acidification action plans this summer. Yet we know there's more work to be done. And as we begin to recover from the coronavirus pandemic, we need to make sure we invest in our economic recovery in a cleaner, greener, and more equitable way. And we know we can make that happen. Today we'll hear from congressional leaders. We need the federal government to be a partner, supporting action and leadership, not moving us backward like our current administration. Today, we'll also hear about the important ocean climate actions and leadership by many of our fellow coastal states. I'm proud of the work by our many U.S. states to take the science seriously and to take urgent action to address the climate crisis. We've shown we can meet ambitious and science-supported climate goals while growing our economy. Our climate and ocean are intertwined, and our actions to address climate change must continue to reflect that reality. We know we can't let the bottom of the food chain be damaged in the Pacific Ocean. We know that's our heart and soul. So I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Please stay healthy, stay committed. Good luck to us all. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Governor Inslee. The Pacific Ocean and indeed the Salish Sea is our heart and soul, and we are really grateful for everything that you have done and your leadership to protect it alongside our regional partners here in the Pacific Northwest and along the Pacific coast of North America. So now I am happy to introduce Anne Merwin, Vice President of Conservation with the Ocean Conservancy, to lead our discussion about the role of the federal government and the path forward from 2020. So Anne, over to you to introduce your panel.
Thanks, Jesse, and thanks also to Governor Inslee for laying out so clearly the challenges before us. The ocean climate challenge can seem so daunting that it leaves us wondering, where do we go from here? And Governor Inslee kicked us off with a few of the opportunities that he sees from the work of the OA Alliance to building a blue-green recovery. And we're thrilled to have a host of the United States' most progressive state and federal leaders here today to talk about their vision for the way forward. So let's get right down to it, starting with one of the topics that's on everyone's mind right now, the future of climate action and ocean climate action in the US Congress. Joining us today are two of the ocean's biggest champions on Capitol Hill, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and Representative Suzanne Bonamici. I invite you both to turn on your cameras and join us for the panel. Glad to have you both here today. Senator, let me introduce you first, and then we will go ahead and get started. Senator Whitehouse has represented the state of Rhode Island in the Senate since 2007. Representing the ocean state, he plays a key role in crafting policies and addressing climate change, environmental protection, and price on carbon. Senator Whitehouse passed into law a dedicated fund to support ocean and coastal research and restoration, and bipartisan legislation to confront the crisis of marine plastic and other waste polluting our oceans. He has worked to enact bipartisan measures to reduce carbon pollution and boost America's clean energy economy. As a member of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, the Senate Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and co-founder of the Senate Oceans Caucus, Senator Whitehouse has worked for solutions to address climate change and to position Rhode Island as a leader in the clean energy and blue economy. Very glad to have you here with us today, Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Anne.
Congresswoman Bonamici has represented the 1st Congressional District of Oregon since 2012. She is a member of the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. She's also a member of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology and previously served as the top Democratic member on the Subcommittee on the Environment. From this position, she worked to address the causes and consequences of climate change and to ensure that policy decisions are based on science. As representative of Coastal Oregon and co-chair of the House Oceans Caucus and Congressional Estuary Caucus, she's working to draw attention to ocean acidification, harmful algal blooms, hypoxia, coastal resiliency, tsunami and earthquakes, extreme weather events, and marine debris. Congresswoman, thank you as well for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
I'd like to start by opening the floor to both of you to give some opening remarks, and then we'll follow up with a few questions afterwards. So Senator Whitehouse, let's start with you. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Anne, and thank you to Ocean Conservancy for your outstanding work in this area. I'm delighted to be here with my partner in much of this activity, Suzanne Bonamici, and I extend my condolences to her on the tragic situation she has with wildfires in her home state. It's really almost beyond imagining. And although he's gone, big thanks to Jay Inslee for making climate such a big issue in the presidential race. He and Tom Steyer really made a big difference. It's a good news, bad news story in Congress right now. The good news is that even in a very divided and often bitter Congress, there's a lot of action taking place on oceans. Our plastics bill got passed, the Save Our Seas Act. Our Save Our Seas 2.0 went through the Senate unanimously, and Suzanne's now working hard to get it on the suspense calendar in the House to pass. We have the National Ocean Conservation Fund up, running, and funded. And we just had a great hearing in energy on the offshore funding bill to bring more revenues to coast. So the funding side is going well. The Blue Globe Ocean Data Bill is out of commerce and moving forward. Our estuaries bill just got filed with bipartisan support from Senators Cassidy and Carper. Our blue carbon bill, also bipartisan, is starting to move in commerce, along with Senator Murkowski's ocean acidification bill, which is very tightly related. And we have two bills, or two topics, I guess, being addressed in the National Defense Authorization Act that will probably pass right after the election, with a suite of 3 illegal fishing bills and the so-called Sea Fuel Act for alternative energy sources in the Navy. So that's actually quite a lot that is going on, and it's all moving forward and it's all going very well. So that's the good news. The bad news is that the really big things going wrong with our oceans are warming and acidification, and they're caused by climate change, and we are still stuck on getting any kind of a serious climate bill. Now, maybe the election will fix that. I certainly hope it will. But there's one other sign that I want to mention that is potentially a good one, and that is the announcement by the Business Roundtable, which is an organization of 200 of America's biggest corporations, that they want to support an actual price on carbon, which is probably the single most effectual thing that can be done to address climate change. So that's really good news because they're really big companies. The bad news on that is that they have not yet taken that policy and moved it over into their legislative activity. So all of the big tech companies that are part of BRT, the Business Roundtable, that just made this announcement, a week earlier, they were in the Senate with their TechNet lobbying list, and climate wasn't on it, carbon pricing wasn't on it, green energy, nothing was on it. Coke and Pepsi are 2 very strong advocates on ocean plastics and on climate, but their American Beverage Association doesn't lift a finger. Their lobbying arm doesn't lift a finger to do anything. So what I anticipate will happen is that the policy announcement that's been made by these big industries will morph over, I hope soon, into their activities in Congress and in elections, and that will start to make a big, big difference. Because right now, corporate America is simply not active on climate issues in Congress, except in a bad way. And so I hope that this is a preview of a big wind shift coming ahead.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. I think that's
Thanks,
really
Ann.
interesting to hear that you feel like there are potentially some opportunities happening in the Senate, particularly around ocean issues, and very encouraging, frankly, especially when the Senate is often maligned as the slow actor on the Hill. Representative Bonamici, let's turn to you and talk about what you see on the House side of the equation.
Well, thank you, Ann, and thank you, Senator Whitehouse. It's been great to partner with you, and all of you who are here today are so dedicated to protecting our ocean and our coastal communities. I want to start in my remarks by acknowledging that this is a challenging time to discuss forward-looking policies as coronavirus cases continue to surge, unemployment rates are unprecedented, our communities are having sort of long overdue conversations about systemic racism, and extreme weather events and wildfires are jeopardizing lives and livelihoods, including in my home state of Oregon. But even at this moment in history, when our communities are struggling and inequities are more apparent than ever, the climate crisis is continuing. We just can't wait any longer to take action. So I recently joined my colleagues on the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. We released our bold, comprehensive, and science-based climate action plan that sets our nation on a path to reach net zero emissions no later than mid-century and net negative thereafter. The plan is centered on principles of justice and equity. Everyone needs and deserves access to clean air, clean water, and a planet free from toxic pollution. So as co-chair of the House Oceans Caucus and the Congressional Estuary Caucus, I'm thrilled that our climate action plan recognizes the power of our ocean as part of the solution. The plan sets the ambitious goal of protecting at least 30% of our lands and ocean no later than 2030. These protections are going to enhance the ecological benefits, biodiversity, and carbon sequestration value of natural ecosystems in our most treasured wild places. We also have to recall that our coastal wetlands, they're often overlooked and undervalued, but they're among the world's most productive working ecosystems. Wetlands can reduce flooding and coastal erosion. They protect our shorelines and property from damage in the face of sea level rise and extreme weather events, which we know are related to climate change. They promote and protect biodiversity. They offer critical habitat. And blue carbon, which the senator mentions, refers to the powerful ability of these healthy wetlands and coastal ecosystems to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it for up to millennia in stems and branches, leaves, roots, and soils. But despite the tremendous value that the wetlands provide, right now we're losing them at an unsustainable rate. According to the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, the protection and restoration of coastal blue carbon ecosystems could prevent approximately a gigaton of carbon dioxide from entering the atmosphere by 2050. So I'm very excited that the Blue Carbon for Our Planet Act, which the senator mentioned, is a cornerstone of our ocean recommendations in the Climate Action Plan. This is bipartisan. The bill would create a national map and inventory of coastal blue carbon ecosystems and their sequestration potential. Also study the effects of climate change and other environmental stressors on rates of carbon sequestration, improve protections for existing coastal blue carbon ecosystems, and restore and expand degraded ecosystems. So the bill is going to help strengthen that research and support the conservation and restoration of the ecosystem so we can maximize this effective carbon sequestration tool. Unfortunately, as we learned last year from the IPCC's special report on the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate, some of the effects of the climate crisis are already locked in. In other words, our ocean has literally been taking the heat because of our inaction on climate, and we're seeing the effects wreak havoc on our coastal communities. So I was glad that last year the House unanimously passed my bipartisan Coastal and Ocean Acidification Stressors and Threats, or COAST, Research Act, to expand research and monitoring to improve our understanding of acidification and coastal acidification. These efforts will help identify risks, inform vulnerable communities, industries, which are so important to our coast, coastal and ocean managers. How can they best prepare for, when possible, and adapt to changing conditions? This Coast Research Act and a slate of 3 other bipartisan ocean acidification bills that I co-led are also in our Climate Action Plan, and I know the senator is working on those on the Senate side. The plan also calls for updating the Harmful Algal Blooms and Hypoxia Research and Control Act, which I worked on with many of you on the last reauthorization. I'm currently working on a new iteration to increase funding for this vital research and monitoring and better recognize the distinct effects of hypoxic events on our coastal ecosystems. So we know that our ocean and coastal communities are changing rapidly. We must act now. We need everyone, including those from states without coastlines and from all sectors of our economy, to demand action on climate change and protect future health of our ecosystem. As Senator Whitehouse mentioned, many of these proposals are bipartisan, which is very encouraging. I thank you all for your leadership. It will make a difference, and I look forward to our continued work together to advance climate action.
Thank you, Representative. It's encouraging to hear about all those pragmatic solutions that are on the table on the House side as well. I think those sorts of ocean climate actions are incredibly important and can really help the ball move forward on the bigger climate picture. I think as ocean advocates, we also recognize that they are not the only things happening in the universe. And so I'd like to step back for a minute and ask you about something that you mentioned at the beginning of your remarks, and recognize the fact that the United States is currently facing multiple public crises, including a public health and economic crisis. But as the fires and hurricanes across the country illustrate, we're also facing an acute climate crisis, and communities that have grappled with historic inequalities are at increased risk in that climate crisis, as well as in the public health and economic crises. So can you talk for a little bit about your vision for how Congress can address these topics holistically, and how we can set as the US a global example on trying to tackle all of these challenging issues together in a way that is mutually reinforcing? Representative Bonamici, let me start with you, and then we'll move over to Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you for that really important question. Since Labor Day, Oregon's faced these unprecedented wildfires and decimated entire communities. And I want to thank the first responders, many of whom are still working to contain the fires and assess damages. The smoke and the air quality has been really off the charts. A little better now. We've had some welcome rain. My thoughts are with the Oregonians who have lost loved ones in their homes. But there's no question that our state is on the front lines of the climate crisis. We've had hazardous levels of smoke, as I mentioned, blanketing our skies, rivaling some of the most polluted places on the planet. More than 1 million acres burned across the state. So in the coming months, Congress must recommit to passing a recovery package that not only focuses on creating and restoring good paying jobs, we have the opportunity now to incorporate climate resilient infrastructure investments. And that is part of this holistic response. I also want to mention that the Climate Action Plan is very holistic as well. We know that these economic, racial, and environmental justice provisions need to be at the core of our plans to recover. Shortly after we released the Climate Action Plan here in the House, we passed H.R. 2, the Moving Forward Act, which is a very comprehensive, in fact, the most comprehensive climate-centric infrastructure package to date. This bill includes my bipartisan Builds Act and other provisions that will support the creation of good-paying, high-quality jobs in the clean energy and infrastructure sectors. We also have to recognize, as part of the holistic response, that our ocean is an economic force. According to NOAA, coastal communities contribute more than $7 trillion to the U.S. economy annually. So earlier this year, I worked with my House Oceans Caucus co-chair, Congressman Don Young from Alaska, to lead our colleagues in calling for a $10 billion investment in coastal restoration and resilience projects. Also, the creation of an Advanced Research Project Agency, Ocean, or ARPA-O, and investments in ocean observation and monitoring, support for our federal research enterprise. All of these are connected in that holistic response. The investments that we are proposing and hoping we can make, they're modeled on the work of NOAA during the Recovery Act of 2009. So looking at that model, learning from it to protect our ocean and coastal ecosystems, but also create those good-paying jobs that are so desperately needed at this time in our country. So I'm again really pleased that the Moving Forward Act, which we have passed in the House and sent to the Senate for action, includes $3 billion for coastal restoration and resilience projects. So I look at this recovery, all the things that we're facing with the pandemic, economic justice, a lot of people out of work. We need to look at this as an opportunity to advance climate action, to create those good paying jobs, to improve our nation's climate resiliency in an equitable and just way.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse, is there anything you'd like to add? You're on mute, Senator.
I want to commend the House for the work that they've done, not only on H.R. 2, but also under Suzanne's colleague, Kathy Castor's Climate Committee, the very extensive report that they did with recommendations going forward. Unfortunately, we couldn't do anything bipartisan in the Senate, but Senate Democrats put together a very comprehensive and thorough Senate climate report. And I think when you combine the Senate climate report and the House climate report, you get a broad and very effective blueprint for how we would proceed in a Biden administration with Democratic control of those houses. I think things like the new Commodities Futures Trading Committee add to the warnings that are increasingly causing Americans to understand that the failure to address climate change is going to be far more catastrophic economically than any measure to solve the problem. And indeed, that many of the measures to solve the problem provide an economic lift. So it's not a question of economic catastrophe versus bad things that will happen if we solve this. It's really a question of economic catastrophe versus, if we do our bill right, very good economic things that can transpire with a good and effective climate bill. Rule one, job one, is it's got to hit 1.5 degrees or whatever we agree on, somewhere between 1.5 and 2 degrees. If we aren't meeting that basic safety barrier, okay, we got to go back and reboot. But that's goal number one. Goal number two would be, I think, bipartisanship if possible, because that will make it lasting and robust. But if it's not possible, if the Republicans are going to act as spoilers instead of as colleagues, then we've got to be willing to jettison them and go forward with people who are willing to work on this and make progress and hit that 1.5 to 2 degree target. So we have the tools to do it. We've laid it all out. It's been super transparent. And I think it's just a question of getting the leadership in the White House and the leadership in the Senate to make this happen. Certainly Speaker Pelosi has shown great leadership, and indeed, she's the only person with any power in Washington who's actually driven through a climate bill and gotten one passed. She actually did cap and trade back in the day. So she stands tall on this, and the rest of us need to stand up.
Thank you very much for that. And both of you have talked quite a bit about the power of bipartisan action, as you mentioned, Senator, that it can make climate action durable and robust if we can find it. And you've mentioned multiple examples of ocean legislation where we've seen that kind of bipartisan support. So I'd like to dig into that a little bit more now. I think we've seen that the ocean has the potential to support climate action in two ways. First, the ocean is a source of climate solutions, and both of you, for example, have led legislation that advances blue carbon ecosystems. Representative Bonamici, you talked about that earlier. We've also seen, as you both have pointed out, that the ocean can be a unifier across party lines. Can you talk a little bit more about what the ocean brings to the fight against climate change in terms of both ocean climate policies or in terms of political power? Senator Whitehouse, let's start with you, and then we'll come back to you, Representative.
Yeah, I think it brings a couple of things. The first thing it brings is irrefutable data and evidence. The climate denial operation likes to go out and quarrel with complicated computer modeling and get into areas that people don't really understand and sow their false doubt where there is room for confusion. There's not much room for confusion about ocean warming. You measure that with thermometers. People understand thermometers. There's not a lot of room for confusion about sea level rise. You measure that basically with a glorified yardstick, a tide gauge. People understand that. And ocean acidification, you measure with a simple pH test that, you know, middle school science classrooms have to test the aquarium. So this is not complicated stuff. They've never tried to attack it because it's unassailable. Foundation in oceans. The second thing is that you see people who have a real affection for coasts. Back when President Obama made the mistake of opening the preliminary stages of considering ocean drilling off the Atlantic coast, a little group called Oceana ran the tables from Virginia all the way down to St. Augustine, Florida, through all those red states with what they called the Resolution Revolution to reject offshore drilling in all of those highly Republican communities. So there's something about the coasts that brings out the best in people. It really makes a difference to them. And I think even my colleagues who aren't coastal, there is I don't mean to get too spongy here, but there is something about the oceans that brings out something better in people's soul than otherwise. And I think Suzanne sees that dealing with Don Young. As toxic as relations in the House are, here are two people of very different perspectives, but the ocean has brought them together. And I think there are a lot of relationships like that in the Senate as well. So, and also there's a lot to be done. So we got work to do.
Representative Bonamici?
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate Senator Whitehouse's comments. I think with the understanding that the ocean covers most of the planet, and every person on the planet benefits from a healthy ocean. So it's an extraordinary concept that can unify and bring coalitions together that might not ordinarily work on the same issues. And the senator's right. It's hard to argue when oceans are warming and more acidic. That's very factual. It's very science-based. So I have been a longtime advocate for capturing the power of the ocean as part of our solution to address the climate crisis. As I mentioned, some of these consequences are already locked in. You know, I've been working on ocean acidification with our shellfish industry over on the coast. When people hear about this is affecting our businesses, and even if you don't live in a coastal community or work in a coastal community, you want to go to your grocery store or a restaurant when restaurants are open again and be able to have shellfish or know that it will be plentiful. So we know that, again, like Senator Whitehouse mentioned, sea levels are rising. Fisheries are being pushed to the brink of collapse. It's an economic issue. But there is also that draw to the ocean. You know, we vacationed at oceans. There's something majestic about them. People like the pristine coastlines, and they want them to be safe and clean. So our ocean is pretty resilient. You know, last year on World Oceans Day, former NOAA administrator Dr. Jane Lubchenco and I called for the ocean to be a central part of the climate solution, an idea that some may have said was far-fetched at the time, but less than a year later, despite the grim findings from the IPCC, we've seen some pretty tremendous and far-reaching movement in calling for ocean climate action. And that's in large part thanks to Ocean Conservancy, the OA Alliance, scientists, partners around the world. We talked about the proposals on blue carbon, marine energy, marine protected areas, electrifying our ports. There's a growing movement in Congress for ocean climate action. And these policies are again reflected in the Select Committee's comprehensive plan. And I do want to say that protecting and preserving our planet should not be a partisan issue. Look at a lot of the environmental bills that were passed in Republican administrations. I will always start by looking for areas where we can find agreement to move good policy forward, but we know we need to move good policy forward. So we've talked about the work that I've done with my Republican colleague from Alaska, Congressman Don Young. We've identified areas where we can work together to protect the health of the ocean, and that includes legislation to address the stressors, environmental stressors, ocean acidification, algal blooms, hypoxia, preventing marine debris, which Senator Whitehouse I know is, yes, we're working on getting that through the final days here, the Save Our Seas 2.0, especially plastics, which we know cause so much harm in the ocean. We're working on better ocean data and monitoring, strengthening coastal resiliency, tackling illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, as Senator mentioned. I've also been working in a bipartisan basis with my Congressional Estuary Caucus co-chairs, Congressman Bill Posey and Brian Mast, both from Florida. You know, in Florida, they can see sea level rise. It's not theoretical. I mean, they can see it there. They're also co-leading my Blue Carbon for Our Planet Act. So we need bold, meaningful policies to reduce emissions and transition to a 100% clean energy economy. There's places where we can work together in a bipartisan manner to advance ocean climate action. We'll continue to pursue those, but again, we must take action. It's too important. The climate crisis isn't waiting, nor should we.
I think those are great words to end us on here, since we are unfortunately out of time for this panel. You both have painted an incredibly positive and hopeful roadmap for where we can go at the federal level. And I think we're all grateful for that vision and the sense of marching orders that you have just given us as outside advocates to go forth and to work with you and other partners and scientists and the public at large to make this change happen. So thank you both again for joining us. And
Thank you.
We'd like to shift now to our panel of state experts to talk about how the states can make change working with the federal government and on their own. Jesse, let me hand it back to you. Thank you again to Senator Whitehouse and Representative Bonamici for joining us.
Great, thank you so much, Anne and Senator Whitehouse and Rep. Bonamici, for those very inspiring remarks. The ocean brings out the best in people. I think that's a great refrain, and appreciate that offering. And again, echoing the leadership, both on the priorities and the investments that are needed to really carry this forward, and that you have done up till this point is just remarkable. All right. So shifting gears now, I am really thrilled to have with us today 4 states who are not just members of the OA Alliance, but really leaders across a suite of domestic and international climate and ocean platforms. And these states are really doing the hard work of thinking about how do they integrate ocean acidification and ocean change within their climate commitments, climate policies, and what does that mean at the state level and the agency level to demonstrate these solutions, to invest in the science and build up adaptive capacity and resiliency. So I will welcome our panelists to turn on their videos. Today we have Maryland Department of Environment Secretary Ben Grumbles, Deputy Secretary for Oceans and Coastal Policy at Ocean Protection Council in California, Dr. Mark Gold, Maine Department of Environmental Protection Acting Commissioner Melanie Loisum, and Hawaii Department of Lands and Natural Resources, Division of Aquatics, Administrator Brian Nielsen. And I really couldn't be happier to have you all here today. You've just been excellent partners as we have both built the Alliance, but also continue to grow it both at a state level and then internationally. And just to set expectations for our panel and for our viewers, we'll have about 40 minutes for this final discussion. I'll ask that panelists please, I'll ask 2 questions to you each in order and limit responses to about 2-3 minutes per question. And then I'll end with a concluding question that I'll ask you all to answer. So with that, let's go ahead and begin with Secretary Grumbles with Department of Environment in Maryland. No. So Maryland is uniquely situated as on the largest estuary in the United States, of course, the Chesapeake Bay. Can you briefly describe just the importance of ocean, coastal, and bay health to the state, economically, culturally, environmentally? What are we talking about? What does this mean? How significant are these resources?
Maryland, it's the heart and soul of Maryland, the bay and the coast. Our cultural identity is tied to the water. I mean, after all, Maryland is for crabs and happy people. And the bay, as the largest estuary, drives our economy, our culture, our quality of life. Saltwater recreational fishery contributed $1.6 billion in sales, which then created more than $800 million in additional economic activity, roughly 13,000 jobs. But it is the heart and soul of the state. And for the Chesapeake Bay, the key for us is the pollution diet, continuing to restore and protect this amazing national treasure. And it takes a lot of effort and coordination driven by science and innovation and partnerships jurisdictionally. And it's all connected to the health of our oceans, our blue planet. I want to thank someone in particular, not just Governor Hogan, who's putting a priority on this, but also Assistant Secretary Suzanne Dorsey. She is becoming the Sylvia Earle of Maryland as it relates to the health of our oceans and coasts and bay. But it is a great way to start for us. It drives our engagement and our priorities. Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you, Secretary. And the Sylvia Earle of Maryland, I want to get that going. I really like that. We'll see how many Sylvia Earles we can bring forward here across our different states.
The Sturgeon General.
That's great. Excellent. So following up last year at COP25, which was of course hosted by the UNFCCC, you signed a joint statement with 5 other states outlining the importance of commitments to decrease greenhouse gas emissions, increase ocean-related mitigation and adaptation, facilitate the development of clean and renewable energy, and reduce shore and land-based stressors that all exacerbate these larger ocean and coastal change issues. Can you share more about Maryland's efforts under these commitments? What have you done to date, or sort of can you give us some examples of what that actually looks like and what that means? And further, give us your thoughts on why that collective or multi-state leadership is so important. What's the utility of it, and what do we have to learn from each other?
So thank you. This is a follow-on to the Blue COP, last year's COP. And it's so important to focus in on greenhouse gas reductions and nutrient pollution reductions. And Maryland is proud to be part of a bi-coastal, bipartisan team on this with other states who are joining me on this panel and are very committed. But Governor Hogan is putting a real focus on greenhouse gas reduction and also nutrient pollution reduction. And for us in Maryland, we just continue to follow the science and recognize that we need to get to 100% clean electricity by 2040. We're part of a regional collaborative that is, I think, one of the world's best examples of capping greenhouse gases and investing in those for either whether it's blue carbon or for other healthier lifestyles in terms of reducing emissions. And on nutrient pollution reduction, it is such a huge priority for us in Maryland to protect the Chesapeake Bay. And the key to doing that is reducing nitrogen and phosphorus and the sediments and working together on those fronts. Plus, on October 1, we will be putting in place a ban on styrofoam. So it's all about protecting the streams and the rivers and the bays and the ocean through greenhouse gases reduction and nutrient pollution reduction and reducing the litter and clutter.
Great, thank you. That's impressive and very integrated. My follow-up question to that is, with the partnerships with other states, you know, has it been fruitful to have discussions both on the East Coast, or maybe even around the Bay, of course, but also learning from West Coast states and having information exchanges in the Gulf? Have there been opportunities for that kind of information sharing, and has that been useful?
Okay, that is going to be the easiest question I get all day, because it is so clear. As a state, Maryland is downstream and downwind, and our progress, our work depends on the successful partnerships of others. And so starting locally and regionally, absolutely. Maryland with other states like Virginia or states above us, Pennsylvania, Delaware, it all depends on working together and sharing information and strategies. And then in terms of West Coast, East Coast, and around the country, one of the highest priorities right now is putting together strategies that put a price on carbon to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, because that's obviously such a huge globally and locally necessary strategy to try to mitigate ocean acidification. And so, yes, we learn a lot from our colleagues above us, below us, to the west of us. It's critically important, particularly when there's a vacuum of federal leadership at that level. The states need to step in. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. All right, well, moving then over to the other coast, speaking of, very happy to welcome Deputy Secretary Gold to the discussion. So Secretary Gold, California, as I understand, is the 5th largest economy in the world and the 3rd longest coastline in the US. Can you share more about California's leadership to set and implement goals that protect California's coast and ocean resources? And why are these goals so important to the state? And how and why is science so foundational to achieving those goals?
Thanks, Jesse. The Governor Newsom administration and my boss, Secretary Crowfoot, definitely have made the coast and the ocean a top priority. One of the things we have is our Ocean Protection Council. We just put together and approved earlier this year a strategic plan to protect California's coast and oceans. And we did that with goals, objectives, actions, metrics, milestones. So we really want to make sure there's measurement, accountability, all of those other sorts of issues. 4 pillars to the approach: climate being first, equity. We want to make sure all of our coastal resources, there's access for all, and we're not seeing climate impacts and coastal impacts disproportionately hit underserved communities. Biodiversity and the blue economy are the 4. And one of the things that you said that's really important in California, as you know from our UC system and the research networks that we have with all the universities and the national labs, et cetera, and JPL, is we do agree with Secretary Crowfoot that science does know. And so that's a critical part of what we do. We fund actionable solutions-oriented science to deal with our coasts and oceans. And one of the big examples of that is on ocean acidification and hypoxia. We're doing a California current model. It's been going on, putting this together, working with the University of Washington, UCLA, NOAA, Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, looking at California, Oregon, Washington, the most complex physical biogeochemical model ever developed. And the point of doing that is to inform the state and the state water board on how do we move forward with actions either in the regulatory or management realm to really stem the impacts of ocean acidification and hypoxia. And so that's something that we will have those sorts of recommendations in place by 2025. The problems that we have in California, our north coast kelp forests have collapsed. And really are struggling in a big way. You've heard about plastic pollution, which of course is a global problem with 8 to 12 million metric tons per year getting into our ocean waters. Sea level rise issues are becoming a bigger and bigger issue in the state of California. Harmful algal blooms, loss of our iconic beaches from sea level rise, our tide pools, our wetlands, they're all at stake here. So the problems are enormous, and so our strategic plan was really designed to try to solve those problems or really respond to them as much as possible. And some of these issues you wouldn't really expect, like the heat wave issues, climate impacts, really causing habitat compression issues where you have species shift, habitat shifts, and we've actually seen much more whale entanglement in our Dungeness crab fishery, our top fishery in the state of California, as a result of these sorts of issues. And we're really trying to tackle those head on. On sea level rise, we set the bold target of trying to make the entire coast of California resilient to sea level rise of up to 3.5 feet by 2050. We've also developed principles that apply to nearly every department and agency in the state of California. They've all been willing to adopt them and start using those. Wetlands and eelgrass, obviously wetlands are so critical to the sea level rise issue. So we've set numeric targets for both wetlands, 10,000 acres of new wetlands in the next, by 2025, eelgrass, another 1,000 acres, and doing that also by 2025. And we understand there's also blue carbon benefits and biodiversity benefits to that. Setting up a kelp action plan. Right now, we're actually putting urchin fishermen back to work in removing urchins where we have barrens to give kelp a chance to come back and perhaps create kelp refugia along the north coast. And on the blue economy side, offshore wind, which has been discussed at length, it's something that we're looking at very seriously in the Humboldt region and Central California, because we have to meet our target of 100% renewables by 2045 in the state of California. And of course, to get rid of that past, we really want to decommission and remove the offshore oil rigs that just really are not functioning at all and are still a scourge on our coast. So there's a lot that we need to do, but the state has really taken a great deal of leadership through this effort to really measure how we're doing and set some targets that we all have to meet.
Great answer, and very impressive, and really huge gratitude for Ocean Protection Council and all of your partners in the region and along the coast that have just been so ambitious and necessarily so. So thank you for that answer.
Welcome.
And following from there, and perhaps it's natural progression, is that internationally, California has been engaged on so many fronts. So a co-founder of something called the Under 2 MOU, who is linked to Climate Group, our host here for Climate Week 2020, co-founder of the OA Alliance, and most recently your leadership on the Pacific Rim Ocean Climate and Action Partnership. And what I wanted to ask is simply, why is it so important that US states continue to lead as subnational governments in this international stage? Are there things we can learn from each other, state and other national or local governments, of course? And what is our role? What is our state role on these international climate ocean platforms?
Well, Jesse, California didn't get to be the 5th largest economy in the world by just looking inward. We have an international trade has really been a way of life in the state. Just the coastal economy alone is over $54 billion a year, for perspective. Subnationals and cities have led the way on climate and sustainability throughout the world. That's just a fact. And the model works. We need to do the same on our oceans because there's just so much at stake. As an example on ProCap, this is a great opportunity to develop new partnerships, learn from each other on best practices and the latest science, and also work together to protect our oceans and our coasts. No one nation or subnational can solve these complex global problems alone. So we really have to work together, and ProCap brings Pacific nations and subnationals together to really solve these complex issues. We've talked about all these as a global crisis, so obviously no one subnational can make the difference, but subnationals are much more nimble, they're much more creative, they come up with a lot more solutions, they have much greater ties to their research communities, and really getting them to be more solutions oriented. And that's really why working at the subnational level is just absolutely critical. Climate action has shown us the way with greenhouse gases. It needs to do the same exact thing when it comes to our coast and oceans.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here this afternoon. Excellent, and that's maybe a great segue over back to another coast, and really thrilled to have Acting Commissioner Loisem with the Maine Department of Environment here with us today. And Deputy Secretary Gold, I really liked your comment that the states sometimes have deeper connections to some of the research institutions or deeper ties to the science that is more local and regional. And I think that's a great segue in that the state of Maine has been a real leader in ocean science and engaged in linking climate and ocean science through risk and vulnerability assessments and thinking about what the policy nexus is there. So Acting Commissioner Loisem, welcome. And I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit more, describe the role and the purpose of the recently created Maine Climate Council, and how does the Coastal and Marine Working Group fit in?
Great. Good afternoon. Thanks, Jesse, for that introduction. It's wonderful to be a part of the panel today and to have the opportunity to highlight what we're doing in Maine through the work of the Maine Climate Council. Maine has thousands of miles of coastline. We have lots of little peninsulas and inlets, and when you add it all up, it's a tremendous portion of our state that runs alongside the ocean. Climate change is affecting our farming, fishing, forestry, recreation, and tourism industries, our ports, our roads, our wastewater infrastructure. The Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 99% of the rest of the world's oceans, and we're already seeing the effects of ocean acidification on our commercial fishing industry, which employs nearly 30,000 of Maine's population. So clearly, action and adaptation are necessary to protect both our state's economy and our environment. In June of last year, Maine's legislature approved Governor Mills' bill to establish the Maine Climate Council. And that council has been charged with advising the governor and the legislature on strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050 and to prepare for and adapt to the consequences of climate change. So this is one of the first pieces of legislation in Maine that really brings together mitigation and adaptation. The 39-member council was created to be supported by 6 working groups, which includes a coastal and marine working group and a science and technical subcommittee. These groups include a diverse array of experts that represent elected officials, scientists, Maine's industries, youth, community, business, and nonprofit leaders. The council is due to produce an update to the state's climate action plan in just a couple of months, which will likely result in a variety of bills for consideration by our legislature next year. Maine's Department of Environmental Protection is going to continue providing our biennial reports on the state's progress to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and then the council will be reviewing and updating the state's plan every 4 years. The Science and Technical Subcommittee was created separate from the working group to focus specifically on questions of science. It was charged by our legislature to establish science-based sea level rise projections for our state's coastal areas and to advise on methodologies and science for land and ocean-based opportunities for carbon sequestration. That subcommittee did recently release its report, which is available on Maine's Climate Council website. That report includes individual chapters on ocean temperature, sea level rise and storm surge, ocean acidification, and marine ecosystems. The report stresses the need for action, including a commitment to manage sea level rise of 3.9 feet by 2100, but to be prepared for a rise of 8.8 feet. The Coastal and Marine Working Group, separate from that subcommittee, was formed to consider the impacts of climate change on both our natural resources and the interconnection to our economy. This working group also built off of information and recommendations from Maine's ongoing Ocean and Coastal Acidification Partnership, which we refer to as MOCA, which was formed several years ago. The working group has clearly identified that acidification is causing reductions to foundational species in our food chain, impacting commercially harvested species, changing species composition in our marine ecosystems, and contributing to an increasing suite of non-native species. We are still in the process of learning and expanding our ability to compost green crabs, for example. Some of the Coastal and Marine Working Group's recommendations include protection of eelgrass beds and coastal wetlands, and management of upland stormwater quality to reduce nitrogen loads to our tidal waters. So I would note that one of the things that we've identified that's really important is to not lose sight of the interconnection between our upland development areas in the state and our rural areas, and how all of that has the potential to drain into our ocean waters.
Thanks so much, Acting Commissioner. And that maybe leads to my second question quite well, which is, the Climate Council will come out with a series of recommendations, and you well laid out sort of what those various considerations or pillars of the Climate Council are going to be. Looking to the longer term, how do you expect what the Climate Council is doing now, how will that help inform future decisions that might not always be climate focused around the state work and state legislature? How do you think that this will further feed decisions 5, 10, 20 years from now? And in that framework, why do you think that it's so important to make sure that there is that ocean incorporation into that larger stocktake of the climate risks and work yet to be done?
Sure. So the plan is going to be due at the end of this year. And in the near term, that's going to result in likely a variety of bills and rule changes, both connected to those bills and that will need to happen independently. The council itself is created in legislation to go on in perpetuity. So unless the statute is changed, the council's charge is to continue to update that plan for the state every 4 years. So it creates an iterative process for that membership. Because of the diversity of the stakeholders that it draws together, it gives us the opportunity to create networking and collaboration amongst the stakeholders. Although the charge is to be focused on climate, it has so much interconnection in the state of Maine to our natural resource industries, which are connected to our tourism industries. The way we are connected economically in Maine is so tied to natural resources and therefore so impacted by climate change that the work of this group has the potential to inform broad policy discussions.
That's great, and really appreciate you being here and Maine joining the OA Alliance, I believe last year, and I think we have a lot to learn from each other as states going through these processes and these policy frameworks of how these integrations are going to work, and to your point, the iterations that we'll need to update as we go, and the engagement of the stakeholders and science bodies around the region. I think that's a great example that Maine is pushing forward, and looking forward to sharing out what you have learned and your best practices as we go. So turning it now over to Hawaii Department of Lands and Natural Resources, Division of Aquatics. And Administrator Nielsen, I'm so happy that you were able to join. Thank you for getting up a little earlier than the rest of us to be here. And Hawaii is such a special state and special place in the world, and really can be considered a big ocean state with origins and deep identity found within the Pacific Ocean. And before we kind of get into a technical question, I just wanted to ask you what you think people should understand about Hawaii's relationship to the ocean and why that relationship makes it so important that we urgently accelerate ambition for climate action.
Good afternoon and good morning. And thank you, Jesse, for inviting the state of Hawaii to join this distinguished panel. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about moving together with other states on climate change action. And it's reassuring and wonderful to hear the progress that other states are making. But to address your question, the people of Hawaii are deeply tied to the ocean through culture, traditions, practices, sustenance, and of course its economy. But ocean stewardship is extremely strong and goes back centuries in Hawaii. And today we have many Hawaiian communities actively managing ocean resources by submitting proposals and management plans to create subsistence fishing areas and to work with state co-managers to actually manage ocean resources in their area. So this is becoming a growing program to manage nearshore resources in Hawaii. So that's one of the areas that has a lot of opportunity. And as an island state, our economy is highly dependent on the ocean. We have a tourist-driven economy, so people come from all over the world to visit our beautiful beaches, go snorkeling, dive on our reefs, join whale watching tours, eat Hawaiian seafood. This all depends on healthy, intact ecosystems that are all vulnerable to climate. Our reefs also protect us from storm events. Hawaii is well known for its big waves, but living reefs ensure that those waves break offshore and not on our shorelines and compromise our homes and schools and roads and businesses. So this natural infrastructure that protects us from storm events relies on healthy ocean and living reefs to maintain that infrastructure. So Hawaii is seeing the impacts of climate change, compromising all these things. And this is why we feel the urgency to act now on climate change as it takes hold. We've had unprecedented coral bleaching events over the last several years that have resulted in coral loss. We're seeing king tides inundate our shorelines and more frequent and severe storm events damaging our reefs and polluting our waters. So this is why addressing climate change is so urgent for Hawaii and Hawaii's communities. And there's not a whole lot of buffer between ocean health and all aspects of life in Hawaii.
Mm. What a sentence. Thank you for sharing that, Administrator. And to follow up, since I have you here with a little bit more of a technical question, I'm so pleased to have been in partnership with Department of Aquatic Resources and learning more about some of the policies that you're all advancing in the management aspects. So Hawaii has been leading on coral reef restoration plan, as you mentioned, responding to some of the warming and bleaching events, 30 by 30 marine management goals, and commitments to further integrate ocean acidification specifically and other changing conditions within some of these existing priorities. And so I just wanted to hear your description of, one, why Hawaii thinks it's important to include ocean acidification as you further assess these climate risks and vulnerabilities. And also, are there existing partners in the region that are doing research that are helping or can help inform that process?
Yeah, so as Hawaii sees, with our bare eyes, climate change taking hold through major coral bleaching events where the reef turns stark white, due to ocean heat waves, and if they remain in that state, the corals end up dying. That's something that everybody can see. Or king tides inundating our shorelines, flooding homes or eroding shorelines. Those are very visible impacts of climate change. But ocean acidification is more of a silent threat for Hawaii right now. We're not, you can't really see it with your bare eyes. So that's why monitoring is so important for Hawaii, because ocean acidification leads to bioerosion of our reefs, and this can impact our shellfish, our intertidal species like crabs, oysters, sea urchins, limpets, halimeda seaweed beds. So ocean acidification poses a major threat to Hawaii's ocean resources, just like coral bleaching. And it's important that we take a few more steps to monitor ocean acidification, to be able to understand the risks and impacts and seek ways that we can mitigate those impacts. And so, yeah, we've, through the Ocean Acidification Alliance and putting our action plan together, we've established a great partnership with state and federal government, universities, non-government agencies, and communities to monitor and study ocean acidification and inform future assessments.
That's great. Thank you so much, Administrator Nielsen. It's really excellent to have you here this morning, so thank you for making the time. All right, and as we now conclude our event for this afternoon, I did want to ask one final question for all the panelists to respond to, as maybe some closing remarks or maybe some inspiration, but we'll see. It's maybe inspiration mixed with some practical advice from you all about where we go from here. So as governments and communities around the world are continuing to address the health, social justice, racial justice, and economic crisis that has just been accelerated by COVID-19 and has exposed so many of our multiple vulnerabilities, as well as the important role of government at multiple levels. How do we continue to ensure that climate and ocean action is understood as essential for helping to address these inequities that persist across our civic lives and better achieve resiliency? And as a state, do you have thoughts on how states specifically can provide guidance and examples for successfully moving forward on these multiple fronts, knowing that resources might be limited and that there's a big load of work and a big road ahead? So Secretary Grumbles, I'll start with you, if you're willing.
Yeah, I am willing, although if you're looking for inspiration, I don't, manage your expectations. I am inspired, though, but in the midst of all the pain and suffering that we have seen during the pandemic, I am inspired by the recognition of the highest leaders in the states that surround the Chesapeake Bay, 6 states, the mayor of the District of Columbia, the head of the federal agency, EPA, all acknowledging in terms of ecosystem restoration for the Bay connected to the oceans, that the key is to also advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. To bring it home, to embrace a restoration from the inside out, and make sure that we, just like we know that all of us know we have to incorporate science to get sustainable results and solutions. And we also have to and need to recognize that the key to resilience is diversity. And the key to sustained environmental progress for our oceans and bays and all connected to it, which is everything, is to have a more equitable and just approach. So having political leaders and agencies that are focused on the environment be more inclusive, reach out to more stakeholders, broaden the partnership tent, because we absolutely need it to make progress on ocean acidification and the health of our oceans.
Great, thank you so much for those words and perspective. Administrator Nielsen, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, so these are all issues that Hawaii is also experiencing. And I don't want to minimize those issues, but they also present some opportunities. So that the COVID-19 crisis has added increased awareness of our ocean resources, especially at the beginning of the pandemic when grocery stores had lines out the door, shelves were empty, people were wondering if the next shipping barge that supplies food and supplies to Hawaii would continue to operate. And many people found themselves out of work and need to put food on the table. So this awareness of healthy oceans and sustainable fisheries has increased during the pandemic. And knowing that our food security depends on productive oceans, it serves as our food reserve when global issues arise like the COVID-19, but it could be the next hurricane or another major disruption down the road. So global climate change compromises our food security. And so now is a good time to put out a call to action on climate change. In addition, we look towards economic stimulus opportunities, blue and green jobs, and technology focusing on conservation. This is a great time to invest. But in terms of, working together, I think sharing success stories among states is critical. Climate change policy and ocean resource management can be very controversial, and we need to share success stories to help convince our government leaders and stakeholders that taking action on climate change can have successful outcomes. Thanks.
Great, and thank you for that offering. I think that is a good plan for the road ahead, is to continue to stay connected with each other in those in those success stories. I appreciate that comment. All right, Acting Commissioner Loisem, over to you.
Thanks, Jesse. I would echo much of what Administrator Nielsen just said, as we recognize how much people have been struggling during this time. It's hard to say that it has presented opportunities, but maybe in state government, that's what we do, is we turn lemons into lemonade. And we've certainly seen a very similar effect to what he just described. I think we found that in the midst of this crisis, it has forced some very quick changes to how we all engage with our communities, how we engage with our staff. A great example, I think, in terms of food supply was that when, exactly as he described, people were wondering where they were going to be able to, buy their next week's supply of food for their family. The folks on Maine's working waterfront created social media groups and put out notices that you could drive to certain landing spots along the waterfront, and it was all outdoors and everyone was careful, but those fishermen needed to sell what they had been collecting. They needed to still get the return on the investment for their boats. And there were people inland who, wanted that food resource. So it enabled us to really highlight how important the ocean resource is to us. It is also, going to the issue of equity, highlighted the need for equitable access to broadband. Maine is what most other people would consider a very rural state. And we have much of our workforce, anyone who's able, working remotely from home, as you can see from my backdrop. And not everyone has this kind of access, enabling them to continue to collect a salary. But we've seen through surveys and other data collection that the change in our transportation behaviors right now is reducing fuel consumption, which, as we know, reduces greenhouse gas emissions. It's also reducing demand on our transportation infrastructure. It produces a co-benefit of reduced particulate emissions, which reduces some of the risk, it sounds like, of trying to grapple with COVID infections. So I think we're seeing COVID gives us the opportunity to reconnect so many of the environmental issues we all deal with public health issues as well.
Great, thank you so much for that perspective. And And I'm, I'm glad that equitable access to broadband, I appreciate you mentioning that. That's such a critical takeaway from this period of time. So really, really happy to have those remarks. And finally, to conclude our remarks from the panel, Deputy Secretary Gold, love to hear your thoughts on this from California.
Thanks, Jesse. I feel like my colleagues on the panel have expressed a lot of the concerns very, very well. The reality is that this pandemic, with 200,000 casualties in this country, has really exposed the inequity issue in such a major, clear way. And so rather than really talking about what to do immediately and the things that the state have been doing, just to really make clear that a healthy public, healthy ocean, healthy environment means we have a healthy economy. And we see what happens when that's just not the case. I mean, we're struggling here in the state of California. We had 4 million acres of wildlands burned in the state, 4 million. And, you know, this is going to be something that I think will resonate with Ben. Our system is not set up, to deal with a catastrophe of that scope and scale. And then you look at the environmental impacts you've seen. We've had the worst air quality in the entire planet in our state, in Oregon, in Washington. You know, places, especially Oregon and Washington, are not known for poor air quality. The air quality is what we were breathing in the last 2 weeks. But for those of us who deal with water quality and watersheds and coastal issues, we realize that those particulates and all the pollution generated by those catastrophic record burns are going to be hugely impactful within our watersheds, from the headwaters to our estuaries to our coastal waters. And we have no mechanism at the state level or at the federal level to really monitor those impacts and figure out really what the overall damages are on that. And frankly, that's the sort of thing from the federal level. FEMA should be looking at that as well, because it has an impact on our fisheries. It has an impact on our coastal economy. And many of the people in the most rural communities obviously have been the most impacted. And so even how we do disaster response, those inequities are still built in. We're not looking at the environmental impacts of those disasters. As soon as they end, they end in the people's eyes. They end a lot of times in when it comes to funding. We need to look at that longer term, where the impacts literally could be over the next years. If somebody was discharging the amount of polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, you know, from a refinery into our watersheds at that level, we'd be screaming for an enforcement action. But instead, we don't even monitor what the impacts are and really try to assess how it's impacting human health and water quality, and probably fish contamination and seafood contamination as well. So I just bring that out as a point, as something that I think is really critical, and that this equity lens really needs to be applied to all of our coast and ocean decision making. When we look at sea level rise, who's the most influenced by that sea level rise? We focus most on these popular beaches, less so on port environments where you have poor communities, diverse communities living, where sea level rise could literally lead to toxic sites, posing even more environmental health problems within those communities. And that's just something that has to change, and we all have to work together to do so. It can't be one community, one state. It has to be at least on a national perspective.
Well, thank you so much, Deputy Secretary, and everyone of the panelists this afternoon, and maybe to add a little bit of inspiration before we go back into the rest of our Climate Week. I'll just say how inspired I am by all of you, by all of your remarks today, all the state governments, federal, city governments that we get to work with on this ocean climate nexus. I think you have provided such great specific details of what that actually means from an operationalized perspective, and also given us a lot of things to think about from a ambition increasing perspective. And I'm just very pleased and grateful to be in partnership with all of you who are working so hard to increase that ambition, because as we all know, we don't have a lot of time here. So I'm very grateful for the panelists. I'm grateful for our co-host Ocean Conservancy, and of course viewers who are joining us here today during Virtual Climate Week. And we appreciate your partnership as we continue to build this next decade together as we go. So thank you for your time and contribution to this important work.